record. Okay, well, welcome everybody. And I wanted to hope everybody had a nice holiday break. What I'm going to talk about here today is going to hit some of the major trends of 2022. And then I thought we would touch base about maybe what people think is going to happen in the solar industry in 2023, knowing that we're probably going to be wrong about all of that stuff. So anyway, the top 10 stories, and this is obviously very subjective from my point of view, but I did a lot of research about what happened over 2022, and I just thought these were the top 10. I started out with number 10, kind of looking at the downfall of PowerHome solar, then transitioning to peak energy and trying to rebrand itself. PowerHome solar was one of the largest installers certainly in the Midwest, but nationwide as well. And then was one of these companies that advertised you could put solar in for next to nothing, and we're going to put it in as a lease, and then we're going to hire people who do a crappy job, and we're going to give you poor customer service, and we're not going to follow through, and then we're going to charge you a lot of money. And anyway, they rebranded as Pink Energy, and then they went out of business when they started getting investigated. So I think it's an example of we must have come of age when all of the scoundrels and the crooks start getting involved in the solar industry. Number 9. Thinking that Perovskite, for those of us who have been around the industry for a while, Perovskite is a new technology that gets kicked around as far as the next big thing. And I think in 2022, we began to see that some of the issues that were holding Perovskite back were actually addressed in 2022. The main issues with Perovskite, one reason why silicon has not stepped aside in favor of Perovskite, is that it tended to leach out lead into the environment. So that was a bad thing, of course. It's a pollutant then. And then it tended to degrade relatively quickly when exposed to sunlight and moisture, which, solar typically is exposed to sunlight, I hope, and moisture. So, but both of those technical issues were pretty much addressed in 2022, and we began to see Perovskite integrated as a first step as a layer in a silicon solar panel. So we're starting to see these hybrid panels where you've got a base of silicon, but then they start putting a Perovskite layer on top of it. And as a result, we're starting to see some multi-junction systems that are approaching 40% efficiency, which is pretty dramatic. But the real advantage that Perovskite has is the cost of production is like only 1/10 of the cost of silicon. And silicon's already pretty cheap. So if Perovskite becomes a thing, then the cost of the solar modules will be reduced dramatically. And of course, the energy imprint to make a solar panel gets reduced dramatically as well. So another one is California during this last year, for one day, reached almost 100% as far as power on the grid coming from renewable sources. And I find this significant because for a long, long time, the industry experts, the people that in the know, were saying, listen, renewable energy, not a bad idea, but it cannot support the grid. It can at best be a supplementary source of energy. 25% was a number that was always thrown out. The grid cannot tolerate more than 25% renewables because the sun doesn't always shine, the wind doesn't always blow, all of that kind of thing. Well, we're seeing, at least for brief periods of time, yes, the grid can, in its current infrastructure, operate 100% from renewables. That's not a 24/7 kind of thing, but it's beginning to show that this is possible. And as we begin to integrate storage onto the grid, it's going to become more and more likely that a significant portion is renewable. Manufacturing of solar is starting to come back home. We've seen over the years as solar has grown as an industry, the technology was developed in Germany and the United States. Then it was offshored to China. Then China offshored it to, Vietnam, Malaysia, Cambodia. Now we're starting to see countries like the US saying, okay, we need to have this coming back home because the world is an uncertain place. And in order for us to have a sustainable and reliable supply chain, it's got to be manufactured domestically. And it's not just the US that's doing this. It's happening all over the world. Europe, you'll see it as the industry grows in South America. You'll see that these folks are going to want to manufacture these products locally. It just makes sense. The electric vehicle, to my way of thinking anyway, has become mainstream. Some of us have been around EVs, and of course, nobody on this call is a normal person. I think I can say that clearly. You're in the know about renewable energy, an early adopter of all of these things. But EVs are becoming mainstream. I think this is the first year where Joe Sixpack sitting on the couch is going, you know what? I think that Ford Lightning looks pretty cool. So EVs have entered into the vernacular, and we're starting to see this. It's going to just continue. It's going to evolve there. All right. And as part of this, storage, not only storage from a electric vehicle standpoint, but storage on the grid has become a thing. In fact, for the first time in 2022, I started seeing breakdowns of how much power is being supplied on the electric grid, adding storage as one of the supply sources. Always before it was coal, natural gas, nuclear, wind, solar, and then miscellaneous. Well, now you're starting to see storage as a source of power on the grid. And we're also seeing in 2022, for the first time, the majority of the installs at the residential level began to incorporate storage as part of the installation. And we begin to see, even if it's not as part of the initial installation, they're designing it so storage can be added later without a big deal. So we're seeing that begin to happen. I think in 2023, we may find, and this is getting a little ahead, but in 2012, we saw that solar and grid power hit grid parity, basically, same price. That's that point where it was the same price for you to install solar as to just continue to buy from the grid. I think in 2023, we may see solar plus storage beginning to hit grid parity in many parts of the country, where you can install solar and batteries and still it will, over the 25-year period, be cheaper than just staying connected to the grid. So that's a big deal for 2022. The pushback against net metering really went full Monty here in 2022. California, with their net metering 3.0, sort of shot the big shot across the bow of the solar engine, where essentially they gutted net metering. I mean, there's just no way to put it otherwise. They just said, all right, instead of us paying you retail for your solar that you're feeding back to the grid, we're going to pay you avoided costs, wholesale, low cost wholesale. So really what they looked at is the cost that people were getting went from essentially 30 cents a kilowatt hour in California down to about 3 or 4 cents a kilowatt hour. So it really gutted net metering. I think this is a first step to where net metering will become as we know it, a thing of the past, where you could just run your meter backwards, run your meter forward, and only pay the net amount. That's gone. And from the perspective of the utility, it makes sense that it would be gone because they're in the business of selling power. Why would they pay you retail for power when they're buying it elsewhere for wholesale? So they're going to say, hey, we'll pay you wholesale, but So then the customer is going to say, all right, well, then I'm going to start storage. Why would I sell it to you for 3 cents and then buy back from you for 25 cents? You know, I'm going to keep what I generate. And with the price of storage, that becomes a real option. So, and then I also believe, well, I won't get into that just yet. We'll talk about that for 2023. All right. So item number 3, this was a real shock to the system. Back in the early part of the year, when the Commerce Department announced they were going to go ahead and investigate to see if the panels that were coming from those 4 Southeastern Asian nations of Cambodia, Vietnam, Malaysia, and Thailand, if they were simply trying to avoid tariffs that were imposed on Chinese panels. Well, most of us in the industry are going, yeah, duh, don't you think? But what happened was, as soon as that investigation began, if the finding was against the companies, the Commerce Department could impose 200 or 300% penalties against the company buying those panels. So if you're buying $1 million worth of panels and it turns out that, you know, if it's found against you, you would owe $3 million, you know, you're not going to do it. So what ended up happening is within a week, literally, 75% of the supply chain disappeared. So this was a major trauma to the solar industry. And as a result, everybody said, you know what, we've got to take control of our supply chain. And we saw that manifesting itself elsewhere. So number 2, the Russian invasion of Ukraine. This obviously had impacts far beyond the world of solar and renewable energy. But what it did was jump-started or reinvigorated the transition to renewable and local energy. Not for the first time, but in a very dramatic way, energy was weaponized in this, where Russia said, we will cut off your supply. Well, the countries of Western Europe said, you know, this is an unacceptable situation. We are dependent on a country that we cannot trust as far as being a reliable supplier. So let's take this time to transition to local production. And of course, local production means primarily renewable energy. So we're seeing then Western Europe investing in that. We're seeing the US for other reasons investing in that. We're seeing it happening everywhere. So the invasion of Russia just gave one more reason why energy has to be locally controlled and locally produced. That's just the reality going forward. And then the big dog, I think, for renewable energy or solar in the US was the Inflation Reduction Act. And I think those people, I've heard a lot of commentaries within the industry going, you know what, years from now, we're going to talk about before the Inflation Reduction Act and after the Inflation Reduction Act. There's the industry before, there's the industry after. The IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, put these incentives that we've been getting every 3 years, it put them there for 10 years. So for the first time, the industry can sit down and go, you know what, these tax credits are there and they're going to be there for the long term. So we can begin to plan on that. Then they began to incentivize domestic production of product. So we've seen a huge amount of investment in US-based manufacturing as a result of this. They also incentivized putting solar on traditionally polluted, you know, brown fields, black fields, gray fields. So we're beginning to see, all right, let's start putting solar where the land is already polluted. And let's start putting solar in places that have been traditionally dependent on fossil fuel, like West Virginia. You know, this is the Joe Manchin provision of the IRA. We're going to give you an additional 10% if you're installing these things in a region that has traditionally relied on fossil fuels. And then the low income. So we're seeing solar being used as part of a wider social process to try and change where and how we're generating energy. I think it's as big an investment as we've seen as like the interstate highway system back in the 1950s, 1960s, when the government decided to change the way transportation was handled across America. Well, we're seeing this now, changing the way the energy system will be handled across North America. And it's going to be decades before we see the fallout of the ramifications of this particular policy. But the policy implications are huge and dramatic. I mean, 2022 was a watershed year for renewable energy and solar in particular. So we're going to hopefully not have as an eventful a year in 2023. It was just too much stuff going on. All right, so that was kind of my quick recap of what happened in 2022. Does anybody have anything they'd like to add to that, to those top 10? You know, obviously there's lots of other things going on, but anybody think there was something glaring that I omitted in this? Give somebody a chance. Now, see, I must have been way too thorough on that. All right, so then as we're going forward, then I thought what I would like to do is throw it open to some of you shy folks and say, all right, so that's the year that was. So where are we going in the year that's coming up? Where do we think we're gonna, what are the things? And there's always a danger when we do this because everybody says, yeah, the things that happened before are gonna happen again, just more so or a little bit less so. So let me throw one out that I think the one of the things that's going to become huge will deal with the world of charging stations, EV charging stations. So not quite sure what that means, but we've talked about using cars as battery backups or electric vehicles as battery backups for your home or business. And so these charging stations are going to have to be bi-directional. But it just seems like there's a lot of unanswered questions around the world of charging stations. Is it going to be DC based, where we're taking DC and charging a DC battery in the vehicle, or is it going to be AC based, where the inverter and all of that take place in the vehicle? I know Tony, who has been on the calls before, who runs a charging company. When you're talking about an AC-based system, it's just basically an extension cord, right? A glorified extension cord where you're taking AC power from your home and you're putting it into the vehicle, and within the vehicle, it's transforming it from AC to DC to charge the batteries. And then it's taking the DC and inverting it to AC to power your home if you're using your home as backup. So any comments about charging stations? The wonderful world of charging stations. Right.
And one thing, a friend of mine drove to Wisconsin a few months ago and used her app to find the charging stations, and roughly half of them were out of order. She would drive out of her way to get to a charging station. There was no indication on the app, you know, of its current working condition or not. Is that an issue you're aware of?
Well, I can certainly see that it would be. Yeah, I don't know. We're still in that early stage of charging stations where, you know, I'm only now starting to see them at hotels, you know, where people can charge at the hotel. You're seeing them at some gas stations, but they're just not that widely available at the moment. But yeah, if they're not available and you drive 40 miles out of your way to get to a charging station, problematic. So
sounds like we need more field techs is all right. No more training, boots on the ground.
Yeah. Well, the other issue with charging stations, and I know we had a discussion about this, is we have to begin to change the way we think about refueling our vehicles. You know, because no longer are you going to be able to just pull into a gas station, you know, go in, pee, get a cup of coffee, and in 10 minutes you're on the road again. because now it is a multi-hour event to have to change, to recharge a vehicle, even in the best of situations. So, so how are we going to change the behaviors that have been developed over the last few decades around long haul travel? I'm not quite sure what that means, how that means, but it's definitely got to change. So,
Jay, do you think that the cost of both equipment and installation of EV charging sites is going to come down markedly once there's some competition? Because the costs you've cited seem ridiculous for what the equipment probably was.
yeah, the cost of the charging station itself, I don't think is going to be the big issue. Although some of those level 3 charging stations can be $100,000, but so can a gas pump, at a gas station. So that's not really the concern people have. The real concern has to do with the way billing is handled for charging. So for example, let's say you run a little mom and pop gas station and you spend $2,000 a month on your electric bill, and that covers your coolers and your whatever, everything. Now you decide that you're going to add a electric vehicle charging station. And it's a fast charger. Well, during a 15-minute period, perhaps it's drawing 600 amps of power. Well, the way that the utilities charge with demand charges is they put in the factor of what is the 15-minute increment during the course of the month that you use the most power. So one person uses your charge station one time during the month, it can double your expense for your electric bill. So is that realistic? Are you willing to spend $2,000 just to have an EV charger, there? Because the utilities are the way that they're charging for electricity. And then what if you need 10? What if you need 20? There's just no way you can recover the cost of that. So that's something that's going to be a huge impediment. The demand charges, the way that the utilities charge for electricity, is just going to be a huge impediment to charging stations. So, anybody else have any comments on EV charging stations? Otherwise, I'll jump into my second idea here, and then I'm hoping somebody else will jump in.
Yeah, Jay, Bill
hey,
Swan.
Bill?
Yeah, you mentioned $2,000 for a charging station. I bought one the other day for $180, a level 2 thing that plugs into 240 volts.
Yeah.
I don't know what you meant by charging, unless you're talking about level 3 is probably even much more expensive.
Yeah, no, what I was saying is the level 3 charging station for sure might cost $100,000 to install.
Right.
But the $2,000 is the cost of electricity for the month, just because you're using it one time, because of the way demand charges are charged at the commercial. I was just giving an example that's something like that.
It.
So it makes the pricing of the electric vehicle charging stations just a no-go financially.
Okay. All right.
So,
Jay,
yeah.
At one time, there was a lot of discussion, maybe not a lot of discussion, but there was some discussion about having replaceable batteries. And I remember an Israeli company had tried for a while to push, we've talked, as you just mentioned, change the way you go to the gas station. They tried to say, well, you can pull in, we can have it changed in 10, 15, flipped it in, take the old one out, put the new one in, like a Coke bottle or something, returnable stuff. Is that completely dead now? Have you heard anything else about that at all?
I haven't heard anything about it. I was thinking about that the other day though, Don, because it's an idea. The problem is these batteries are pretty well integrated into the vehicle, in the structure of the vehicle. So I don't know how practical an idea would be. It'd take a lot of cooperation amongst a lot of different manufacturers. And we're not pretty good at cooperating. We can't even get the plugs uniform, let alone the batteries. So I think that's dead in the water.
Okay, that's what I was curious. I hadn't seen anything in a while about it, but I just wasn't sure. So, okay.
Yeah, one thing that Tony mentioned that Tesla is doing, because of the demand charge and the high amounts of power that's required to run these charging stations, they're actually bringing in trailer load batteries to be the source of recharging for the Tesla power stations.
Huh.
So they're bringing in these trailers, hooking up the charging stations to them. And then when the trailer battery is depleted, they simply swap out, and then they'll take that trailer back and recharge it at a wind farm or a solar farm or whatever. So that's an option. You know, that's a bigger rechargeable battery to avoid some of the demand charge infrastructure requirements. So
What I've seen on a special one day is the major trucking companies are setting up those kind of systems.
yeah,
Where the truck would go into the depot, slide one battery in. So you can see FedEx and LTL and all that doing that because it's feasible for them.
yeah,
I mean, they've got all kinds of depots all over the place. When they drop off a load, they switch the battery and move out again. So for major companies, like even rental companies, you can go from one rental company to another. I think in that kind of venue, that would be a possibility for the future.
yeah. You mentioned rental companies. I could see a company like, you know, Avis or Enterprise or whatever, setting it up where you simply bring your EV in and you're driving you're driving cross country. Well, pull into a place in St. Louis, swap your car, you know, drive off for another 400 miles, drop it off, pick up another one, you know, like it's almost Pony Express all the way across the country there. So we need to have some new
essentially hop Costco's from cross country for gasoline. Walmart could do that with cars and have a franchise of their own vehicle with interchangeable batteries, and that would give them a real market benefit advantage.
Could be, although my wife wouldn't let me stop at Walmart because they're evil. So I wouldn't be able to cross country. It's funny, we talk about electric vehicles and we always worry about the cross country issue, but how many of us drive cross country, you know, once a year, maybe? You know, we shouldn't be making our driving decisions based on the infrequent time where we actually drive more than 400 miles in a day. You know, if you've got an EV with a 400-mile range, 99.9% of the time, that's fine for you to then charge at home or at work. You know, I mean, that's going to cover you. So I think we worry a little bit too much on the range anxiety thing. Well, let me throw out number 2 here, different idea, solar pushback. I think 2023 will be the year to attack solar. You know, from a political standpoint, I wouldn't be surprised to have congressional hearings about the evil solar people, you know, and I just wonder if anybody else sees something like that looming out there for 2023. Yeah. All right, so I'm the only paranoid one.
No, I think it's going to get heavily attacked more and more, definitely in 2023, and then escalating as it starts to overtake fossil fuel usage.
Yeah, we've
only begun.
It's that old Gandhi thing. First they ignore you, then they ridicule you, then they attack you, and then you win. Yeah, I just feel like we've seen it a little bit with the net metering 3.0 in California. That's sort of the first shot across the bow. But I just feel like we're going to start seeing it become highly politicized. You know, why not? Everything else is. So
well, I think also that we're going to start seeing a large amount of probably fraud for the amounts of money that's available. There's going to be things like Solyndra that are going to pop up all over the place. Pink solar, that's going to be something that's going to be common in the next 10 years.
Yeah, all of the cowboys, all the shysters come out of the woods. And speaking of that, I don't know, people will disagree with this transition. When I was trying to think about things that could happen, I think Tesla might go bankrupt in 2023. So What do you think? I'll throw that one out there. Tesla's got some real customer service issues. They're hemorrhaging money. Their CEO seems to be a basket case. So anybody have any comment on that? I mean, it'd be a shame, but
Jay, you might be right, but a lot of people have made that same prediction every year for the last 10 years.
Yeah. Yeah. I keep thinking Dick Cheney's going to die. You know, he's been on my list of celebrities who are going to die the next year. And he just goes on and on. So who knows?
One year, eventually you'll be right, but it might not be within our lifetime.
Yeah. Well, he doesn't have a heart. So, you know.
I don't think the federal government is going to shut him down because he makes great rocket engines.
Yeah. Well, that's obviously, you know, with with SpaceX. I don't know, you know, Tesla has had this cachet for a number of years. But now they're going to have to compete against actual car manufacturers, you know, for the manufacturer of electric vehicles. And I think we're going to find that a lot of these people who have been making cars for a long time can maybe do it better than Tesla has. You know, and so I just wonder if it won't be the DeLorean of the 2020s where, you know, got a lot of hype and then disappeared.
Don't hate on the DeLorean. They're coming out with an EV model.
There you go. Yeah, Don, you had a comment?
I was going to say the way I would put it is it's like Apple versus the PC.
Yeah.
I think that there's a cult that's going to follow Elon Musk. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but I mean, there's just people who believe in him and what he's doing and think that he can do no wrong, the same way with Steve Jobs back in the day. And, you know, most people are going to use the standard PC type stuff. That'll be 80% of it, but he's going to have a solid, you know, nugget of people that aren't going to go away from him, I think. Even though you're right, I think you hear the stories about where they put in a long-term battery for somebody just because that was available, and then they electronically lock it down to being a short-term battery. I don't know if you heard that one, where somebody had their Tesla fixed, and they got the longer-term battery just because that was available, but then they locked it down so he couldn't use it.
Yeah.
But
well, that doesn't surprise me.
Yeah.
I think there is an analogy amongst the Apple because Apple for a while there was in financial trouble and then managed to evolve their way into a different company. I'm just not sure currently that Tesla has that kind of agility to make those kind of necessary changes.
Yeah.
So,
Jay?
Yeah.
Right now, a Powerwall will keep a house going for 3 to 6 hours, right?
Yep, sounds right.
Okay, so 2 Powerwalls is 6. So you're going to need 3 Powerwalls to get off the grid, right?
Typically, depending on the length of time that you want to be off, for sure.
And Musk was going to get better batteries so that he can come out with a under $10,000 car built in Germany. So what's your prediction for batteries improvements in 2023?
Well, my prediction has been for a while that we're going to see the batteries that we use to back up our home will be the same batteries that are in our electric vehicle. I think that becomes the obvious choice. You might have a small battery just because your vehicle is not always parked or connected to your home. But most of us, if we're talking about an extended power outage, are going to be relying on the Ford Lightning or the Tahoe or whatever, the EVs that have dramatically they're huge battery systems and relatively inexpensive compared to a standalone battery pack.
So if you have a Ford electric F-150 and it's enough to power your home and get you off the grid, what do? Park the car in the garage and leave it there all day?
Yeah.
At night?
Yeah, if you've got an extended power outage, yeah. That's why you might want to have, because the Ford has depending on the model, around 100 kilowatt hour battery system. I think the big one's like 120 and smaller ones like 92 or something like that. anyway, you know, that's a lot of battery. Well, why not have a system that's got a 3 kilowatt hour battery that's attached, you know, a standard one that'll handle the 5-minute, 10-minute, you know, power outages. But if you are going to have a multi-day power outage, then you're going to have your vehicle there, you know, that services as your battery bank.
Well, there's a guy down the street here who put up 2 power walls and a ton of panels and spent $75,000 on this system, not because he wants to save money, not to save the world, because he is sick and tired of the bureaucracy of the Duke Energy down here.
Yeah.
And so we're talking about a guy who would just park the car there 24/7, regardless of the power outages and stuff like that. He just wants to get off the grid.
Yeah. Well, I think it's an option. It's definitely an option.
So
Well, I think
what I'm asking is, do you see improvement in the efficiencies of batteries in the future, and what do you see there?
Sure, for sure. I mean, we're seeing that all the time. Not only are the batteries getting better, but they're getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. So, you know, that becomes, if you can get a 9 or a 100 kilowatt hour battery in a Ford Lightning with a retail price of $40,000, I mean, that's pretty amazing. I mean, how can you beat that? Now, I know that you can't buy one for $40,000, but that's what the price is at the moment. Bill, you had a comment?
Yeah, I was going to say that I still think that a large amount of the market is for load shifting. It's just that 3 to 5 hours that Bob was just talking about. I think it's really, that's what will address the problems with the net energy metering. I mean,
Yeah.
it does address the duck curve.
Yeah, that's basically if you've got time of day pricing, which most utilities are going to move to, if they haven't already. You know, many people in states don't have the time of day pricing, but if you have it and the utility is going to mess with your net metering agreements, you're definitely going to want to install batteries of some sort just to deal with that load shifting. And at the commercial level, you're probably going to want batteries to deal with demand charges, you know, to flatten your demand curve as well, just to avoid some of those charges. So we're definitely moving into the world of batteries integrated in almost every system.
But
Has
Jay,
anyone thought? Yeah.
Yeah,
But-
Jay, it's Matt. So, and I agree with you about Apple and PC, but you got to remember that Bill Gates and Steve Jobs being opposites fueled the computer age. Because I mean, I remember using a cassette player computer when I was a young person, and look at where they are now. I mean, Tesla for his cars has had really no competition, and I mean, he's done stuff with batteries nobody else has done. Now, I have been reading a lot more about, and that's where I think if he gets some real competition in the car part and on the solar, that's different. But when he gets some more competition in cars and things like that, it's going to fuel more stuff, and I think it might be a positive thing. But see, I've been watching what is CATL? I guess that's how you say the company's name. They're working on a sodium ion battery, which is kind of interesting. And then of course, there's this author, I keep reading his book called Jay Warnke, and he talks about saltwater batteries. So
yeah, I think we're definitely in a transition period with lithium ion. Lithium ion is problematic because of the way it's mined. So, but I don't know that in the short term that's going to change. It's not a 2023 kind of thing, but maybe a 2030 kind of thing, where by 2030 we're going to see this. Although I will throw out the other thing that that author that you mentioned, who is overrated for sure, who that I'm keen on, is Perovskite. And I think that 2023 is going to be the year that we see the first true Perovskite panel. You know, not a hybrid panel, not a multi-junction panel with perovskite and silicon, but the very first venture out there into the world of perovskite. And I think that will be interesting to see how that evolves, because I have a feeling it's going to happen quickly when it does happen. So,
Jay,
yeah.
I was gonna say, based on your comment before about the lithium, I'm just curious, like for the other materials necessary for solar, not just batteries, but solar in general, have you seen anything about, I've heard a number of people talk about Russia and Ukraine were either one or two for a lot of the raw materials necessary just to build the solar panels and stuff. Have you heard anything on that? Or any
Yeah, I haven't heard. I know Russia is a source of lithium for sure. And I think Afghanistan as well. They're, of course, the ABC countries, the Argentina, Bolivia, and Chile are the main sources of lithium. But yeah, it's one of those extraction economy things. So definitely problematic. Most of the materials in solar panels themselves, silicon being the main one, then you have aluminum, for the frame, and there's some silver that's involved. In fact, a significant portion of the world's silver is used in the manufacturing of solar panels, the wiring that's part of that. Those are the main three. There aren't, I know people will throw out heavy metals and things like that, cobalt. There are some of those in battery technologies, but just not that much. So silicon, aluminum, lithium, those are the big raw materials at the moment. China definitely has a lock on the silicon market for sure. I think the last I saw was like 90% of the world's silicon comes from China. So that can be very problematic.
Now, going back to your comments about perovskites, Jay, you were talking about how perovskites would be a perovskite only panels coming out. We're talking efficiencies of maybe 4 to 6%. How is that different from different from amorphous?
Yeah, no, it's perovskite efficiencies in the last year have hit 28%.
By themselves.
Yes, by themselves. That's the main reason, the main problem with perovskites have been the leaching of lead and the fact that they were not very robust. But those are technical issues that that definitely have been addressed. Now, whether they've been addressed at scale, I don't know. But yeah, you're right in that 10 years ago, we were only dealing with 3 or 4% efficiencies on perovskite, but the efficiencies of perovskite themselves have increased dramatically in laboratory environments. We don't have anything out there in the field at the moment. And one thing about perovskite is it is a thin film technology. So the amount of materials that are required are very, very small. Only a couple of atoms thick, which is one of the advantages of perovskite over silicon, for sure. A lot less material, and you don't need the heat that's required to melt silicon in order to make an ingot and a solar cell. It takes a fair amount of energy to do that. So
and they come in colors.
Yeah, you can have them in multicolors, and they can be translucent. So you can begin to have surfaces that are, it's an inkjet technology. So, any surface that can receive paint could in theory become a generator of power. So now you're looking at the surface of an automobile. The paint job of a car could be a generating the paint on a building, the windows on skyscrapers, lots of different applications. Just we haven't seen this developed yet, but this is definitely the next big thing. This is like moving from CD-ROMs to thumb drives. I mean, we're about to move into this next age of solar, and whether that happens in 2023 or a little bit later, it's going to happen. Right. Any other predictions for the good of the cause?
It's not a prediction. It's a question, crystal ball question. 5 years from now, will Ford Lightnings be on the market as used pickup trucks or batteries on wheels?
Oh, well, they are pretty much batteries on wheels at the moment. I don't know. Somebody put a comment in the chat as we were talking that, you know, you don't buy vehicles very often. Most people don't. So this transition to EVs, you know, if every vehicle sold today was an electric vehicle, it would still be a dozen years or so before most of the vehicles on the road are electric vehicles, because vehicles hang around for a good long while. So it's going to be a pretty slow transition. I don't know. I guess your question is, would you just buy the Ford Lightning to park in your car and use as a battery, park in your garage, or would you drive it? Yeah, I guess that's depends on your motivation, but
And what happens when it has no shock absorbers left, but it's still got a good battery? You put it in your, you know, becomes a decoration in your front yard.
yeah, why not?
How long will the batteries last, though? How long will they? That's the other question, I guess.
Yeah, that's the big unknown, because they are basically, you know, a battery with wheels. Well, if the battery stops working, and they typically don't just one day they're working fine and the next day they don't work at all. They tend to just lose range, you know, over time. They lose the ability to generate power. So maybe it's 90%. Well, you know, a 75% Ford Lightning may not work as a car, but it would certainly work as a stationary battery. So, you know, that's, does it have a second life, you know, to pull those batteries?
Or a truck around the farm and just and all stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, most of the new vehicles become vehicles that we own, you know, I mean, around this area, they're all up on blocks in the front yard anyway. So what the heck? Yep. And yeah, hybrid can be a generator for sure.
Make a good goat habitat there.
Why not?
One thing, I think something might come this year, more about education with solar. You know, we have all this federal money. Department of Education will probably stick their nose into that too, I would imagine.
Yeah, I hope the same thing doesn't happen that happened in 2008 with the Obama stimulus money, where they put a lot of money into education. They issued a lot of grants to a lot of different technical schools and community colleges, and they all went out and bought lab equipment and started up programs run by people who didn't know what they were talking about. They did a bad job advertising them, and then they all kind of faded into the background because they were crap and they weren't advertised. So, and then the powers that be said, see, nobody wants to learn about solar. You know, well, it's because you did it very badly, you know. So, you know, that's, hopefully we won't see a repeat of that.
Okay. In terms of resource use and resource availability, early in the PV years, we talked about the possibility of not using silicon or semiconductor grade silicon. There would be a lower grade of PV quality silicon that would be allowed to have acceptable reductions in efficiencies, but greatly reduced cost in purification. The same thing I'm wondering about, and I read an article, it's been maybe 3 years ago, where they were talking about using copper tracings instead of silver tracings, and with great efficiency, with efficiencies that were comparable to silver. So, you know, there are going to be substitutions of materials. Instead of silver, I mean, that's got to add a lot to the cost of recovering, but copper tracings might be something that will become available too.
That makes sense. I heard an interesting podcast over the weekend where they were talking about the concept. You know, the solar industry in recent years has touted itself as the low-cost energy alternative. You know, solar is cheaper than all of the other alternatives. And that concept is a bit of a race to the bottom. How can you be the cheapest, lowest cost energy source? And does that mindset have to change? Because we're starting to see a lot of these cost-cutting measures where we're beginning to see like mismatched MC4 connectors that are causing fires, and higher failure rates of product, and the inability to get product when you need it. So are we going to see this industry get out of that mindset of being the low-cost alternative and focus more on we are the locally sourced, more resilient, more dependable form of energy as opposed to the lower cost alternative? So I just wonder if that's a mindset that's going to take hold.
Someone in the chat mentioned fusion energy possibly overtaking solar. Well, fusion requires tritium, hydrogen with 2 neutrons. That's very rare, and it costs $30,000 a gram. And it's made from, guess what? Lithium.
There you go.
So I don't know.
Yeah, well, we already have space-based fusion power. So it's just 90 million miles away. So I think we'll take advantage of that fusion for a while. I'm not that hyped on the main issue I have with fusion is it reinforces that centrally owned, centrally managed, centrally controlled energy model, and I rebel against that. Nothing more than just, I think it's better if we begin to distribute ownership of the energy production and ownership of the energy control. I just think that's better for everybody. But I think fusion is going to be a lot like nuclear, where there's going to be a lot of government money being poured into a lot of powerful corporations without much result, for the foreseeable decade or so. All right, well, we're coming up on the end here. Anybody have any final words of wisdom before we call it a day?
Hey, I wouldn't call it words of wisdom, but I'm here servicing a 4-panel tracker, and I'll turn my camera around. This is a hydroponic setup. 4 panels charge 2 very large lithium. I'm sorry, I wish they were lithium lead acid batteries below the plywood. 24 volts, and I swapped out this charge controller because one went belly up, and the inverter's right here, a 300-watt inverter that runs the pumps. Unfortunately, the freeze killed all the fish, but that's another thing. And then I also zoom in. This is the controller. This is a tracker that moves rain or shine. It's based on time. And there's a Arduino Uno below this display. And this is a solid state relay for turning on this motor, actuator motor. And then there's a real-time clock right here that remembers the time. And it's going to move in another 8 minutes. I won't wait for that. But, if you have trackers, you got maintenance.
Yeah. That's one of the issues with them is any moving part requires maintenance.
Yeah.
So, well,
all right.
It looks like everything's nice down in Houston for you there, Bill.
For now.
Right now, till the next hurricane. All right. Well, I think we'll, on that note, we'll call it a day. And I will mention, I think I'm going to be teaching class next week, in fact, I know it. So we'll have another week off next week, and then we'll meet back here in 2 weeks. So, all right. In the meantime, if you have any ideas, send them my way and we'll do them as a subject.
Thanks, Jay.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.